Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The weight of privilege. Tom Archer leaned back in the plush leather seat of the first-class lounge at Orlando International Airport, his expression a blend of irritation and impatience. He was a man accustomed to control, a self-made millionaire who believed every aspect of life was a transaction, including respect. With his tailored navy suit and a briefcase worth more than most people's monthly rent, Tom looked every bit the image of success. Yet, as he scrolled through his smartphone, reviewing a stream of emails, his irritation only grew. The delay on a shipment to his Chicago headquarters wasn't just inconvenient, it was unacceptable. Amateurs, he muttered, his fingers flying across the screen as he dictated a scathing email. His assistant had tried to reassure him earlier, but Tom had little patience for excuses. To him, the world was a chessboard, and he the grandmaster. Every delay, every misstep by others, felt like a personal affront to his perfectly curated life. Over the speakers, the boarding announcement for Flight 309 to Chicago crackled, signaling that first-class passengers could proceed to the gate. Tom grabbed his briefcase and strode toward the boarding area without a glance at the attendant who greeted him. Time was money, and small talk was an investment he had no intention of making. As he walked down the jet bridge, the click of his Italian leather shoes echoed sharply. At the entrance of the aircraft stood a flight attendant, her uniform pristine, her poise unshakable. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said with a warm, practiced smile. Her name tag read Sasha. Tom barely acknowledged her with a curt nod before brushing past her to his seat in 2A. As he settled in, he caught glimpses of Sasha moving efficiently through the cabin, her calm demeanor radiating professionalism. Yet, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, her presence unsettled him. Perhaps it was her quiet confidence, or perhaps it was the implicit challenge she seemed to represent, someone who carried herself as an equal in a world where Tom believed he stood apart. From his seat, Tom observed Sasha assisting passengers. He noticed her patience with an elderly woman struggling to stow her bag, her genuine smile as she reassured a nervous young traveler. There was a grace to her movements, a natural elegance that drew the attention of others. But to Tom, it was an affront. Who does she think she is? He thought, his irritation bubbling beneath the surface. The flight began smoothly enough, with Sasha moving seamlessly through her pre-takeoff duties. Once airborne, she responded promptly to passenger requests, her composure unwavering even under the watchful eyes of the cabin. Tom, meanwhile, had grown increasingly irritable. His coffee order wasn't up to his exacting standards, and when Sasha brought it to him, he barely glanced at her. "This isn't hot enough," he snapped, taking a sip and grimacing. "I apologize, sir," Sasha replied calmly. "I'll bring you a fresh cup right away." Tom scoffed. "Don't bother. I doubt it would be any better. You people never get it right." The venom in his words lingered in the air, audible to nearby passengers who exchanged uneasy glances. Sasha's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, but her response remained measured. "Is there anything else I can assist you with, sir?" Tom waved her away dismissively, muttering under his breath. Sasha turned and walked back to the galley, her step steady, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. In the privacy of the galley, she exhaled deeply, gripping the counter to steady herself. Years of experience had taught her to weather such storms, but the sting of his words cut deeper than she cared to admit. Later, Tom pressed the call button again, more impatient this time. Sasha returned promptly, her professionalism unshaken. "What now?" she asked, her tone courteous but firm. "This blanket smells," he said, holding up the airline-provided cover as though it were an insult to his very existence. "Get me a new one. And make sure it's actually clean this time. I don't trust your standards." Sasha's hands trembled slightly as she took the blanket, but her voice remained calm. "I'll bring you a replacement right away, sir." When she returned with a fresh blanket, Tom made a show of inspecting it, his sneer growing wider. "I suppose this will have to do," he said. "Though I don't expect first-class service from someone like you. Honestly, it's clear they've lowered their hiring standards." The passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Sasha's stomach churned, but she forced herself to smile. "Your feedback is noted, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom leaned back in his seat, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. For him, it was another victory, another reminder of his dominance. But unbeknownst to him, the flight was about to take a turn he never could have anticipated, a moment that would strip away his arrogance and lay bare the fragility of his humanity. A turbulent reckoning. Sasha returned to the galley, her face impassive, but her mind racing. Tom's words echoed in her ears, leaving behind the sting of humiliation and the weight of exhaustion. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this was different. His contempt wasn't just rude, it was personal. It was the kind of disdain that tried to strip away her humanity, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She tightened her grip on the edge of the counter, willing herself not to cry. This was a job she had worked hard to earn, a career she was proud of. Sasha had always prided herself on her ability to remain professional, no matter the situation. But Tom's words felt like a chisel against the foundation of her composure, carving away at the strength she had carefully built over the years. "You don't belong here." That phrase lingered. It wasn't just about the airline, the uniform, or the first-class cabin. It was about a world where people like Tom believed that someone like her could never truly belong. A fellow flight attendant, Jenny, approached her with a concerned look. "Are you okay?" Sasha forced a small smile and nodded. "I'm fine. Just another passenger with an inflated sense of entitlement." Jenny frowned. "It's not just entitlement, Sasha. What he said was disgusting. You don't have to put up with that." Sasha straightened her posture, pulling her shoulders back. "I can handle it. I always do." Jenny hesitated but nodded, knowing Sasha's resilience was both her shield and her burden. As the flight progressed, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew increasingly tense. Tom continued to make demands, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the plane. Each time, Sasha responded with grace, refusing to let him see how deeply his words affected her. But as she brought him another glass of water, Tom leaned closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you know why you'll never be more than this? Because people like me control the world. People like me decide your worth." Sasha's heart pounded in her chest, but she remained silent. She couldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "You're just replaceable," he added with a smirk, leaning back in his seat. As Sasha walked away, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The other passengers had noticed Tom's behavior, their discomfort palpable, but no one said a word. The silence weighed heavily on her, a reminder of how often people chose complacency over confrontation. The tension was broken suddenly by a jolt of turbulence. The plane shook violently, and passengers gasped as their drinks spilled and luggage shifted overhead. Sasha instinctively reached for the intercom, her training kicking in. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing some turbulence." As the plane steadied, the cabin crew moved swiftly to ensure everyone was secure. Sasha helped an elderly passenger adjust her seatbelt, her hand steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Tom, however, seemed unbothered by the turbulence. He pressed his call button yet again, his impatience undeterred. When Sasha approached, he sneered. "What's taking so long with the food service? Some of us have schedules to keep." "Sir," Sasha said, her voice calm but firm, "we're pausing service for safety reasons. Please remain seated until the turbulence subsides." Tom waved a dismissive hand. "Ridiculous. I've flown on private jets with worse turbulence and had no issues. This is just more proof of your incompetence." Before Sasha could respond, the plane lurched again, this time harder. Tom's expression shifted from irritation to unease as he gripped the armrests. For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossed his face. Minutes passed, and the turbulence finally subsided. The captain announced that they were clear of rough air, and the passengers began to relax. But Sasha noticed something unusual in Tom's demeanor. His face had grown pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He pressed the call button again, but this time it wasn't with the same arrogant fervor. Sasha approached cautiously, noting the way his breathing had become labored. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Tom looked up at her, his arrogance replaced by something unfamiliar, fear. I don't feel good," he admitted, his voice shaky. Sasha crouched slightly to meet his eye level, her concern genuine, despite the events of the day. "What are you experiencing?" "My chest feels tight," he said, his hand moving to his heart. "And I can't catch my breath." The change in his demeanor was stark. The man who had spent hours belittling her now looked small and vulnerable, his bravado stripped away by the realization that he wasn't invincible. Sasha's training took over. She turned to Jenny, who had been standing nearby. "Get the medical kit and inform the captain. We need to prepare for an emergency landing if necessary." Jenny nodded and rushed off. Meanwhile, Sasha focused on Tom, her voice steady and calm. "Sir, I need you to take slow, deep breaths. Can you do that for me?" Tom tried to comply, but his breaths were shallow and rapid. His panic was evident, and Sasha knew she had to act quickly. She reached for the oxygen mask stored in the overhead compartment and gently placed it over his face. "This will help. Just keep breathing slowly." As Tom inhaled the oxygen, his breathing began to stabilize slightly, but his eyes were wide with fear. Am I going to die?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Sasha hesitated for only a moment. "You're in good hands. We're going to take care of you." For the first time, Tom looked at her with something other than disdain. It was as if he truly saw her, saw the human being who was now doing everything in her power to save him. As the plane's crew prepared for a potential medical emergency, Sasha stayed by Tom's side, monitoring his condition. The passengers who had witnessed his earlier behavior now watched silently, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. Tom's arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a raw vulnerability that made him almost unrecognizable. And as Sasha worked tirelessly to keep him stable, she couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. The man who had tried to tear her down was now depending on her for his very survival. The breaking point. The hum of the plane's engine seemed louder in the tense silence that enveloped the first-class cabin. Sasha remained at Tom's side, monitoring his condition with steady hands. The other passengers watched from their seats, their earlier discomfort replaced by a mix of concern and curiosity. Tom's breathing, though still shallow, had improved slightly thanks to the oxygen mask. His face, once flush with arrogance, now bore the pallor of vulnerability. He clutched the armrest tightly, his knuckles white, as though holding on to the plane itself would keep him tethered to life. "I never thought this would happen," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the cabin noise. Sasha's professional demeanor didn't waver, but her words carried a gentleness she hadn't expected. "Nobody does, but it's going to be okay. You're in good hands." Tom's eyes flicked to her, his usual condescension absent. Instead, there was something else, shame. Jenny returned with the defibrillator and the medical kit, setting them on the empty seat beside Tom. "Captain says we're rerouting to St. Louis. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes, she informed Sasha, her voice low but urgent. "Good," Sasha replied, glancing briefly at Jenny before focusing on Tom again. She unwrapped a blood pressure cuff and secured it around his arm. "We need to keep monitoring his vitals." Tom flinched as the cuff tightened, his earlier bravado completely gone. You really know what you're doing," he stammered, his voice uneven. Sasha didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on her task, noting his blood pressure and pulse. But as she adjusted the oxygen flow, she finally said, "It's my job. I've been trained for this." Tom's lips parted, as though he wanted to say something more, but the words didn't come. The minutes crawled by, each one heavy with unspoken tension. Passengers whispered among themselves, their earlier apathy replaced by interest in the unfolding drama. Is he going to be okay? An elderly woman in the third row asked quietly, her face lined with worry. Sasha looked up briefly. We're doing everything we can. The paramedics will take over once we land. The woman nodded, her concern evident. Nearby, a younger man who had earlier buried his face in his book now looked visibly uneasy. He cleared his throat, as if summoning courage, and then spoke. I saw how he treated you earlier, the man said, his voice low but firm. I should have said something. Sasha's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of surprise. It's all right, she said softly, her tone measured. You're speaking up now, and that means something. The man nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. Tom's condition fluctuated as the plane began its descent. Sasha stayed by his side, her focus unwavering. Every so often, Tom would mutter something incoherent, his fear palpable. I shouldn't have, he began at one point, his words trailing off as he struggled for breath. Sasha glanced at him. Don't try to talk right now. Just focus on breathing. But Tom shook his head weakly. I shouldn't have said those things. To you. For a moment, Sasha didn't respond. The weight of his admission hung in the air, and she wasn't sure how to process it. She had endured his cruelty for hours, yet here he was, stripped of his arrogance, apologizing in his own faltering way. It's not about what you said, she replied finally, her voice calm but firm. It's about how you choose to act moving forward. Tom stared at her, his eyes glassy but intent. He didn't say anything more, but his expression suggested he was grappling with a truth he'd spent years avoiding. The plane touched down in St. Louis, the landing smooth, despite the urgency of the situation. The flight crew moved quickly, coordinating with ground staff to ensure the paramedics were ready. As the first-class passengers were instructed to remain seated, the medical team boarded, carrying equipment and a stretcher. Sasha briefed them on Tom's condition with clarity and precision, her professionalism shining through. Thank you, one of the paramedics said, glancing at Sasha. You've done an excellent job keeping him stable. Sasha nodded, stepping aside as they worked to transfer Tom onto the stretcher. As they wheeled him toward the exit, Tom turned his head weakly toward Sasha. Thank you, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Sasha met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Take care of yourself, she said simply, watching as the paramedics carried him off the plane. The cabin buzzed with subdued chatter as the passengers processed what had just happened. Some looked at Sasha with newfound respect, while others seemed lost in their own thoughts. As Sasha returned to the galley, Jenny approached her, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. You okay? Jenny asked. Sasha took a deep breath, the weight of the day finally settling on her shoulders. I will be, she replied, her voice steady. Jenny nodded, giving Sasha a supportive squeeze on the arm before stepping away. As the flight resumed its journey to Chicago, Sasha allowed herself a moment of reflection. The day had tested her in ways she hadn't expected, pushing her to the limits of her patience and resilience. But it had also reminded her of something important: her strength wasn't defined by the opinions of others. Tom Archer's words had been meant to tear her down, but in the end they revealed more about him than they ever could about her. And as she prepared to continue serving the passengers, Sasha felt a quiet sense of pride. She had stood tall in the face of prejudice and emerged stronger. The flight home. The plane's engines droned steadily as it soared through the night sky, its cabin bathed in the soft glow of reading lights. The tension that had gripped first class earlier had dissipated, leaving behind a strange quiet. Sasha moved through the aisle, her demeanor as calm and professional as ever, though her thoughts were anything but. The ripple effect. As Sasha poured coffee for a middle-aged woman in row 4, the passenger reached out to touch her hand. Thank you for how you handled that, the woman said, her voice tinged with emotion. I don't know how you stayed so composed. Sasha offered a polite smile, though her chest felt heavy with the weight of the day. It's part of the job, she replied, her tone neutral. The woman shook her head. No, it's not. You went above and beyond. Most people would have walked away after the way he treated you. Sasha nodded silently and moved on to the next passenger. Compliments, though well-meaning, felt hollow after the storm she had weathered. Her mind replayed the look in Tom's eyes as he was wheeled off the plane, regretful, haunted, and vulnerable. She wasn't sure what to make of it. At the galley, Jenny joined her, a cup of tea in hand. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that, she said. You didn't just save his life. You showed him a kind of grace he didn't deserve. Sasha exhaled, leaning against the counter. Maybe he didn't deserve it, she admitted. But I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it because it's who I want to be. My mom used to say, if you let hate define you, it wins. I think that's been playing in my head all day. Jenny nodded, her expression soft. Well, you've got the heart of a fighter, Sasha. And I hope he remembers that when he thinks about what happened. A letter left behind. As the plane touched down in Chicago, the passengers began gathering their belongings, the earlier incident already fading into the background for most of them. Sasha was helping an elderly man retrieve his bag when Jenny called her over. Hey, I think this is for you, Jenny said, holding out an envelope. It was plain and unmarked, except for the words, to Sasha written in shaky handwriting. Sasha hesitated for a moment before taking it. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a handwritten note on airline stationery. Sasha. I don't know if you'll ever believe me, but I owe you more than my life, I owe you my apology. You didn't just save me today, you showed me the kind of person I should strive to be. For most of my life, I've lived with a chip on my shoulder, thinking my success meant I was better than others. Today, I saw how wrong I'd been. When I looked into your eyes during my worst moment, I didn't see anger or judgment. I saw compassion. And it broke me. I've spent years thinking kindness was weakness, but you showed me how powerful it really is. I'm sorry for every cruel word, every ignorant assumption. I don't expect forgiveness, but I promise you this, I will do better. I will be better. Thank you for being stronger than I deserved. Tom Archer ***. Sasha stared at the letter, her emotions swirling. The cynic in her wanted to dismiss his words as empty, but the part of her that believed in second chances hesitated. Maybe, just maybe, he was sincere. She folded the letter and slipped it into her apron pocket. An unexpected conversation. As the passengers disembarked, many paused to thank Sasha for her professionalism. The man who had spoken up earlier approached her last, lingering awkwardly near the exit. Listen, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been thinking about what happened. I should have stepped in when he said those things. I didn't, and I'm sorry. Sasha tilted her head, studying him. Why didn't you? The man looked down, shame coloring his face. I guess I was scared. Not of him, but of drawing attention to myself. But that's no excuse. You stood up just by staying calm, and I stayed silent. I won't make that mistake again. Sasha considered his words and nodded. Sometimes silence is the loudest choice we make. But it's never too late to find your voice. The man smiled faintly. Thanks for giving me that chance. The drive home. Hours later, Sasha sat in her car in the employee parking lot, staring at the envelope in her lap. She had read Tom's letter 3 times during her break, each time feeling a different emotion, anger, skepticism, hope. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Heard about your flight on the news. You okay? Sasha smiled, shaking her head. The story had already started making the rounds. She typed back. I'm fine. Just another day at work, right? Her mom's reply came instantly. The world needs more people like you, Sasha. Never forget that. Sasha set the phone down and stared out at the city lights. She thought of Tom, of his letter, and of the passengers who had watched her with newfound respect. She thought of the people who had stayed silent, and the few who had found their voices. Maybe today had been more than just another day at work. Epilogue, a different Tom. 3 months later, Sasha received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "From Tom Archer." She hesitated before opening it. Dear Sasha, I hope this email finds you well. I've thought about you every day since that flight. I wanted you to know I've started volunteering at a community center in my city. It's small, but it feels like a start. I also donated to a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in aviation. I hope it helps someone as strong as you achieve their dreams. You changed my life, and I'm grateful. If you're ever in New York, coffee's on me, and I promise it'll be the right temperature this time. Thank you. Tom. Sasha closed the email and leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. She wasn't sure she'd ever take him up on the coffee, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that people could change, and maybe, just maybe, she'd helped him take the first step.